Hello, the basic news of the day in the program time. We begin today with the international events, the Muslim aggression on Sarajevo. The UN is calling for airplanes to blockade that aggression. This morning, Muslim forces began their advance on practically all parts of the front in Sarajevo. Their main aim is to cut off the capital of the Serb Republic, Pali, from the areas of Sarajevo which are under the control of Bosnian Serbs. According to observers, such severe combat action has not been seen in these parts in almost 3 years. In the hospitals already, the first injured are arriving basically from the peaceful residents. As is known, Sarajevo was declared a safe zone by the UN, and therefore the command of the UN forces has requested the presence of NATO aviation in the airspace over Sarajevo to force the Muslim forces to cease their assault. NATO airplanes are already in the air, but that doesn't mean that the Muslims will be attacked. In these circumstances, their forces are engaged in firing at Serb positions from residential quarters of Sarajevo. As a representative of the UN stated, in the event of missile bomb attacks, the threat could be posed to the life of the peaceful population and the UN personnel. For the first time in 3 years of work in the republics of former Yugoslavia, our film crew could not go to Bosnia through the Pasavinsk corridor because of the most ferocious shooting from the Muslim and Croat sides. The only path is closed off, connecting the two Serb crimes with the outer world. In the center of the much-suffering town of Brčko, the narrowest stretch of the corridor, today again 6 missiles of the fire type exploded. The population for days is spending time in basements. In response, Serbs are firing at Croat and Muslim areas on both sides of the corridor in an attempt to broaden it. 2 villages have already switched hands over several times. The squeeze around Sarajevo is tightening. Through the attacks on the Pasavinsk corridor, the Croats and Muslims are attempting to distract forces of the 1st Krajina Corps of the Serb Republic Army from possibly aiding Serbs in western Slavonia. In this region, previously controlled by UN forces, still, despite the signed agreement, the Croat army remains in place. According to the International Red Cross, around 1,200 Serbs are detained in concentration camps in that area. Around 4,000 people during the last clashes are unaccounted for. The situation remains extremely complicated in eastern Slavonia in the zone of responsibility of the Russian Battalion of Peacekeeping Forces. In Japan, arrested and under interrogation is the head of the cult Aum Shinrikyo Asahara. At dawn, more than 1,000 policemen burst into buildings belonging to the cult throughout Japan. Some of the police were armed with gas masks, others carried old-fashioned poison gas detectors, canaries, and cages. And so, one more chapter is closed in the crime of the century, or if you will, the major detective drama which disturbed nations on many continents. As the Japanese police had presumed, the leader of Aum Shinrikyo was hiding in the center of cultists, which is at the foot of the sacred mountain Fujiyama, in the village Kamikuisiki. This is 120 kilometers from Tokyo. But even knowing the underground location of Osahara, it took the police 4 hours to find his lair. And the guru was found meditating in a recluse cell of a height of only 1 meter, well camouflaged between 2 stories of the building. The search for the prophet was complicated because of the use of only pocket flashlights. The guru's novices had turned off electricity and the center was entombed in darkness. Together with Osahara, 14 heads of the cult have been arrested. Among them are 4 members of the so-called chemical group, which was responsible for producing sarin. Sioko Asahara has been charged with murder as the suspected organizer of the terrorist gas attack in the Tokyo metro on the 20th of March. I'll remind you that then 12 people died and more than 5,500 suffered from serious poisoning. With that terrorist act, an entire series of crimes began with the use of chemical substances. The last incident occurred literally yesterday at the railway station Yokohama. To have previously arrested Asahara was impossible according to Japanese law because the police had insufficient evidence. Only after, in various storage sites at the foot of Fujiyama, components of toxic substances were found, and the arrested heads and followers of the Aum teaching gave corresponding depositions, was the detainment of the prophet made possible. But as the Prime Minister of Japan, Tomiichi Murayama, stated today, with his arrest, the danger hasn't disappeared because at large are still hundreds hundreds of followers of the cult in whose hands there may be lethal weaponry. The interrogations of the sacred Osahara have begun. And one more emergency situation in Japan. Today, a bomb exploded in the office of the governor of Tokyo, Yukio Osimi. The bomb for the governor was in a package addressed to him. The secretary who opened the package was seriously injured. Also, one more employee of the office was injured. The explosive device went off at the moment when the governor himself was not present. This occurred several hours after the arrest of the head of the cult, Aum Supreme Truth. However, for now, according to the police, there is no evidence of the cult's involvement in the assassination attempt against the governor of Tokyo. In the Russian Information Chronicle, still of focal attention are events in Chechnya. Suppositions are being justified that the command of the unlawful armed formations has decided to conduct several terrorist acts in the cities of Grozny, Gudemres, Argun, and Shali. Last night, the armed criminals committed a bold attack on the Republican oil park Hein Court, which is in the suburbs of Grozny. Of the 16 reservoirs containing crude oil, 5 were set on fire simultaneously. According to eyewitnesses, they fired from grenade launchers. The object was selected not by coincidence. The Hein Court is the basic supplier of the oil processing plants in Grozny. Today, when electricity was turned on and the plant was preparing to launch another oil line, as a result of the diversion, the Republic is already short 15,000 tons of crude oil, and that means oil workers are left without their long-awaited salaries. It seems that this tragedy could have been avoided if the leadership of the Republic had taken timely concern for protecting the important national object. The matter is unfortunately unresolved even today, and therefore the alarm of the oil workers is understandable for the further fate of their company. Today, this morning, the deployment of forces of border troops began to Chechnya. A Grozny border regiment will be set up, whose aim will be to protect the Chechen stretch of the state border of Russia. Yesterday, federal forces sustained 1 casualty in Chechnya and 5 were injured. Interfox was told by the representative of the United Command. According to his information, losses among the gunmen numbered around 19. The military note the heightened activity of gunmen while crossing the territory of Chechnya in the direction of Dagestan and Ingushetia. Only a few hundred meters divided the positions of the federal forces and the Dudaev gunmen. For more than 2 weeks, they stand facing each other without undertaking any active movement. The gunmen have the preferable position. They have created dugouts at the very entrance into the mountain pass, Agishe. The dense natural curtain, that is 3,000 tons of crude which are on fire, reliably cover them from sight. The gunmen have as an ally the thick forest covering the adjacent mountains, so one cannot count on a quick completion of the operation. What this expected battle will be like, we don't dare predict. Probably not easy. But the command of the federal forces will do everything in order to avoid losses. And today, the commander of the Northern Caucasus Military District, the Colonel General Anatoly Kulashnin, met with the soldiers of the federal forces and as well with residents of those very Chechen villages which must be cleared of gunmen. The commander attempted to persuade the residents to relinquish their weapons, asked the elderly to use their authority and influence the youth, and force it to stop the bloodshed. Sooner or later, the gunmen will have to leave Chereyurt and Chatoy and Serzhenyurt and other villages, and this, in the opinion of the commander, is only a question of time. But for now, the forces are preparing for their blitz. Artillery is engaged, as well as aviation. In Moscow, already they're speaking of the economy of Chechnya. The meeting of the Operative Commission on Restoring the Economy of Chechnya proceeded in rapid tempos. They've developed a mechanism permitted them not to stand still, but adopt possible decisions. From the report, the greatest bulk of the work was done by the Ministry of Roads and Communications, travel restored to and from Moscow, Makhachkala, and mineral waters. Soon the modification of the railway terminal will be completed. The situation is also favorable for the Ministry of Transportation. Almost half the airport is now functioning. Planes are flying to Rostov and Moscow. At the same time, lack of success for residential power situation. That means that electrical feed has not been resumed to residential homes. Commercial banks are violating the uninterrupted financing. Briefly, the volume of work is completed by 80%. Alexis Kavets instructed that 30% of the equipment for the electrical substations in the future will be provided in the form of humanitarian aid. Centralized financing of industrial companies will affect only the oil processing, oil drilling, and heating stations. All other funds must be directed to restore electrical power for residents. The schedule of financing for each month will be confirmed personally by the Vice Premier. Today, observers continue to accent attention on the problem of Nagorno-Karabakh. As you know, marking 1 year of truce, more rounds of talks have begun. Commenting is the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russia, Kozyrev. Andrei Kozyrev today received the heads of the delegations of Armenia, Azerbaijan, and representatives of Nagorno-Karabakh, who in Moscow are holding closed talks on the problem of the political regularization of the conflict. For the second time this year, Moscow, as the main mediator in the Karabakh conflict, is hosting the conflicting sides. However, to speak of any concrete results for now is early. To formulate the text of the future political agreement is hindered by several circumstances. Azerbaijan continues to refuse to recognize Nagorno-Karabakh as the side in the talks. Hence, to define the political status of Nagorno-Karabakh is impossible. Armenia, on its part, does not agree to free the Azerbaijani territory seized during the war, where the towns of Shusha and Lashin are located. Unresolved also are the problem of refugees and future peacekeeping forces in areas dividing the conflicting sides. And although 1 year of truce on the Karabakh front and the recent exchange of prisoners convinced politicians of a possible quick solution, basic contradictions remain unresolved. President of Russia, Boris Yeltsin, sent today to the President of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, a brief message on the success of Sunday's referendum. He expressed satisfaction that in solving matters of their internal constitutional setup, Belarus simultaneously has expressed support for the course of integration with Russia. Official results of the parliamentary elections are still expected. Today in Belarus, all the district electoral commissions are recording and confirming results of the parliamentary elections, which were held on the 14th of May. According to observers' conclusions from the OSCE, European Council, and various organizations from 16 countries of the world, the elections in Belarus were honest, free, and democratic. Although it's noted that insufficient agitation by mass media was noted. 18 candidates who have achieved victory already, among them is the Executive Secretary of the CIS, Ivan Karacheny, still must wait for results of the second round of voting, in which basically the independent and left candidates have emerged, and the majority of prominent names in politics. During these 2 weeks, the pre-election battle will continue among them. Comments on the results of the referendum unanimously recognize the overwhelming victory of Alexander Lukashenko, who for the second time was completely supported by the people, because the presidential elections had almost the same result. More than 80% of the voters voted then for Lukashenko, and now for the questions which he raised in the referendum. The Russian language, which is spoken by the majority of the population in Belarus now, will be the second official language, and economic integration with Russia in the Republic, they hope, will be more realistic. The presidential rule with new powers will be more firm. What regards the national symbolism, today, the main event of the day was the replacement over the president's residence of the white, red, and white banner for a new one, which was recognized at the referendum by 75% of the voters. And again, Moscow, the Kremlin. There, chaired by the President Yeltsin, today a consultative meeting was held on Russian-Ukrainian relations. Participating in the meeting were the Chairman of the Government, Viktor Chernomyrdin, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Andrei Kozyrev, representatives of the Force Ministries, and also the Head Commander of the Military Naval Fleet, Felix Gromov. As the press service of the President of Russia announced, participants of the meeting spoke out for restoration of particularly friendly relations between Russia and Ukraine, a main element of which will be strategic partnership. However, close relations will be real only when a solution acceptable for Russia is found in the matter of the Black Sea Fleet. This was noted at the meeting. How do we proceed with Ukraine in the future? We have an accumulation of problems which is quite abundant, and we cannot any longer continue further accumulating these problems. Immediately after the meeting, which was basically held behind closed doors, the Minister Kozyrev arrived for a meeting with the press. Today, Russian and foreign journalists who gathered in the central office of Interfax were more interested not so much in results of the recent high-level Russian-American meeting as the events in the CIS. For example, results of the referendum in Belarus and the recent strain in relations between Russia and Ukraine. Andrei Kozyrov positively assessed the striving in Belarus to maintain closer ties with Russia and also reminded that under the slogan of growing closer to Russia, winning the seat in office was not just the president of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, but the Ukrainian president, Leonid Kuchma. However, today the visit of the president of Russia, Boris Nikolaevich Yeltsin, to Ukraine is even in a more suspended state, at least, as the Minister of Foreign Affairs feels, until the problem of the Black Sea Fleet is resolved. As soon as this problem is resolved, I think in principle the horizons will immediately be cleared, and we would like that our Ukrainian friends and partners and neighbors would follow that path, the path of realizing principal agreements. I think that here there is no particular secrecy, but without resolving that problem, it's difficult to imagine the resolution in the near future of other problems. Today, Ukrainian Parliament, which convened after a two-week vacation, intended to examine the Crimean problem, but never reached that. They discussed mutual interactions with the executive branch of government and the agenda of the day. Today, on the results of the talks between the state delegations of Russia and Kazakhstan, an agreement was signed on the unified management of customs services of the two countries. Signing the document were the heads of the governments, Viktor Chernomyrdin and Atyajan Kazhigeldin. Now, at the Customs Service of the Kazakhstan Republic, a Russian office will begin to operate, and at the Customs Service of the Russian Federation, a Kazakh branch will open. Hence, the operations of those departments will be strictly coordinated. They will now cooperate along the same rules. In conjunction, they will manage customs control. The governments of Russia and Kazakhstan have also prepared a document on joint protection of the outer borders of the country. Our positions are that we want very much to sign such an agreement with Ukraine. We don't want there to be impediments for our people, and especially since now we're doing this with Belarus and Kazakhstan, and with Ukraine it's especially important. Today the Premier had another important meeting. Boris Yeltsin met with Viktor Chernomyrdin. There they summarized results of the celebration of the 50th anniversary victory and analyzed the results of talks with Bill Clinton. Viktor Chernomyrdin informed the President about the results of the founding conference of the pan-Russian political movement Our Home is Russia. Boris Yeltsin will sign the law on the elections of the deputies to the Duma. This was stated to a correspondent of Intertas by the aide of the president, Georgy Satarov. According to him, after the signing of that law, the president of Russia will formulate corrections of those positions which he disagrees with and will convey them for examination to the Duma. But if the Duma declines them, Boris Yeltsin will appeal this matter in the Constitutional Court. Today, the Constitutional Court discussed a mundane problem, but a daily problem of 3 million children who were at one time repressed together with their parents. This woman, Zoya Alyoshnikova, submitted a complaint to the Constitutional Court. She feels that the law of Russia dating back to 1991 on the rehabilitation of victims of political repressions infringes her constitutional right to equality. The matter is that those children who were exiled together with their parents or transferred, the law considers to have suffered and not to have been repressed, and such wording in the law deprived the children of a significant part of compensation, and specifically the 50% addition to the pensions. Zoya Alyoshnikova asks that this article in the law be amended. Her fate is as follows. She was 11 years old. Her brother was 5 when her parents were repressed and sent to Siberia. Not 1 year passed when her father died from serious illness. For 3 years, 1945, 46, and 47, the family endured starvation. For the 4, including their grandmother, 3 kilograms of barley flour per month were handed out. Here is Alyoshnikova with other exiled people. This is her brother after his return from exile. Later, he died. Our entire family was crushed by the merciless wave of those repressions, and only because of sensitivity of people who we met along our path, I survived. Experts, representatives of the Duma and the prosecutor's office, all of them found the complaint of Zoya Alyoshnikova to be competent, and now the decision must be made by the Constitutional Court. Many of the victims of the Chernobyl disaster also are still waiting for compensation for their damages. In Kiev today, talks began between representatives of Ukraine and the G7 countries on the problems of closing down the Chernobyl power station, which what the effects of radiation are is known well to everyone. In the Chelyabinsk district, apart from the famous Minsk sanctuary, there's also one more sanctuary, the Eastern Uralian one. Specialists call it the nuclear reservation. The problem is that its appearance was preceded by a sad event, a major accident in September of 1957 at the chemical plant Mayak, a defense plant which derived weapons-grade plutonium. Then, as a result of the explosion, the expansive territory of a length of 105 and a width of 9 kilometers was polluted by radionuclides. Some of the nuclear trace, that is, on 17,000 hectares, was reserved for sanctuary. The people were removed from here. Tens of villages were bulldozed to the ground. Entry and exit here are still severely restricted, and free access is only available for the experienced employees of the Science Research Center of the chemical plant Mayak. For them, the sanctuary is a unique scientific polygon where they study the effects of radiation on objects of live nature. But the main direction of their work is a search for means to deactivate the ground soil stricken by radionuclides, development of technologies permitting farm use of lands which almost 40 years ago were subjected to massive attacks by radioactive substances. But what alarms the scientists and radiologists? Today, when many state and collective farms have gained independence and become joint stock companies, when an abundance of farmers is available, the once strict control over the use of the polluted lands in essence has vanished. In the village Muslimova along the river Techa, livestock grazes, and the level of radiation here is significantly higher than permissible levels, and that means that milk, meat, and other products are not safe for consumption. However, the local administration, despite requests of the villagers and recommendations of specialists, doesn't allocate a safe grazing ground. How can trouble be avoided? The salaries in Russia, in their dollar equivalent, in certain months of last year exceeding $100 from November to 1994 until March of 1995 fell from $87 to $72. This Interfox was told in the Center of Economic Reforms within the government of Russia. The level of real revenues of the population currently is lower than 1 year ago by approximately 6%, which is the effect of the strict monetary credit policies pursued by government. This is noted by experts. Money is needed by medics as well, medics who have reason to be proud. On the base of an ordinary hospital laboratory, an international conference is being held. Have a look. Domestic know-how. This laboratory, equipped with ultrasound and thermographic mechanisms, in 15 minutes may do an examination, which under other circumstances would take 1 week. It's possible to set it up in a railway car or on a plane or on a ship. The diagnosis can be made in most severe cases, even oncological ones. The equipment includes devices for biopsies and for cytological studies. Specialists feel that such mobile units or wagons are irreplaceable in areas with high radiation danger, for example, the Chernobyl zone. Incidentally, there are no analogies to this equipment in the world, and in our country this is the only sample, although it was developed 3 years ago in a laboratory of ultrasound and thermographic diagnostics of the first hospital in Moscow, which is headed by the pioneer of ultrasound research in the country, Yuri Nikolaevich Bogin. The laboratory is pursuing many projects, and they are of interest not just among our physicians, but foreign ones. Therefore, the case is a unique one. On the base of a laboratory, an international conference is being held. It's an opportunity to share experience and also a school for physicians. Leading specialists have come from 27 regions of Russia and from abroad. And according to their own admission, the Bogin's laboratory has something for everyone to learn. What regards priority gains of the laboratory, with medics currently, cooperation is beginning with conversion companies, and so possibly the business will move forward. In the official chronicle news that the head of the Russian parliamentary delegation, Vladimir Shumeyko, met today with the Prime Minister of Great Britain and the Minister of Foreign Affairs. One of the symbols of the development of parliamentarianism in the world is the Westminster Palace in London. Today, it conveyed its experience to the young Russian democracy. Although Vladimir Shumeyko did note to the press that the simple accumulation or copying of the structures of British Parliament is simply impossible and also unnecessary. Russia is developing and living along its own laws. What regards the positions of the two countries, they, in the last while, are quite closer, although economic relations are still still behind political relations. This was stated today during the meeting of Vladimir Shemeka with the Prime Minister of Great Britain, John Major, and the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Douglas Hurd. And, of course, the politicians discussed preparations in Russia for the forthcoming elections and also the statement of the President, Boris Yeltsin, on the law governing the elections of the State Duma. We discussed here, and with the Prime Minister and the Minister of Foreign Affairs. It seems to be at the crossroads. It is the central issue in the political life of Russia, and it's possible to still hold elections and conduct to them when they were scheduled by the Constitution. The Duma must make compromise, and that is the compromise. 150 deputies in part of this and 300 according to the mandate system. 300 is the qualified majority, and if it's adopted by the deputies, by mandate system, we feel in the Federative Council that that is good for Russia. In Beijing, talks were held between the Minister of Defense of Russia and the People's Republic of China. Pavel Gorbachev refuted assertions that its delegation is discussing the sale of Russian weapons to China and suggested examination of the matter of creating a system of collective security in the Asian-Pacific region. Details from our correspondent. The Russian-Chinese border without armed confrontation is desirable, but a distant perspective in the plans of the military of the two countries. The stumbling block remains the level of decreasing military technology along the 100-kilometer zone of the border. It couldn't be altered during the visit to Beijing. The Minister of Defense of Russia, Pavel Gorbachev, Russia doesn't intend to disarm to its own detriment. At the same time, at the talks with the head of the Chinese military department, Che Han-tan, it was stated that the partial compromise is possible. This is a measure of trust along the border, which will help to understand better what's happening in the neighboring country and how to react in difficult situations. And so that the understanding should deepen, ministers called for broadening contacts between border military districts. This was reflected in the new plan of exchanges. Beginning of the visit of the Russian minister, China saluted not just with the march of the honorary guard, but another underground nuclear explosion. This surprise didn't bypass Pavel Gorbachev's attention, who said he's following the tests and is informed of China's position in this matter. Judging from the tone of talks, however, this can't serve as an impediment to the development of the Russian-Chinese partnership of a new type, which includes a system of regional security and the assimilation of the Chinese weapons market. Although Pavel Gorbachev refuted assertions that he came to Beijing to deal in weapons, however, evidently, his contact with the Beijing military elite promises the Russian defense sector long-term Chinese demand. A condemnation of the last nuclear explosion conducted by China was issued by the ministers of foreign affairs of the countries of Northern Europe. The passengers of a Filipino ferry attempting to escape from a fire on board jumped overboard without life jackets. 100 people were picked up by coastal services, and almost that many are considered to be missing. 40 passengers died. To investigate the reasons and to liquidate repercussions of the catastrophe in the Philippines, a state commission was set up. In Zaire, each 10 days, the number of those infected by the Ebola virus grows by 4 times. Physicians of the World Health Organizations reported only sanitary education and hygiene, according to the doctors, could stop the epidemic. The deadly virus is transmitted only through close contact with those infected. It's no surprise that among the casualties of the epidemic, almost 2/3 are medical personnel. In usual circumstances, the risk of infection is not great, yet passengers and cargoes from Africa undergo stricter control on borders of many countries. Today, Turkey and the Philippines announced heightened security measures at their customs points. Today, a major fire flared up at one of the factories in the suburbs of the French town Besançon. All the employees of the factory managed to evacuate the building on time. During the fire, toxic substances spewed into the atmosphere, which seeped out during the burning of materials produced at the factory. Local residents were immediately informed of the occurrence. The authorities asked them not to abandon their homes until the repercussions of the fire were liquidated. Again, we return to the topic of political life in Russia, just since our film crew has returned from the Central House of the Literary, where the ex-president of the USSR, Mikhail Gorbachev, spoke. I'll preface this with sociological service information from Vox Populi. The main feature indicates that gradually the old guard is leaving the political scene. Mikhail Gorbachev, Alexander Yakovlev, Evgeny Shaposhnikov, Gavril Popov are on the downslide. Also, our Democrats at first, with Shaposhnikov, Ponomarev, and Shreinis. Today in the Central House of the literary person Mikhail Gorbachev met with the artistic intelligentsia. Incidentally, if more precisely, the artistic intelligentsia met with Mikhail Gorbachev, the non-artistic, non-intelligentsia part of the society, which had no invitation and stood soaking under the rain, managed to tell Gorbachev everything they thought of him. The literary crowd was not quite so aggressive. The ex-president of the USSR was invited to the meeting of the club of the literary house, so the meeting was unofficial, basically answers to questions of the club members and a brief introductory word, but not a speech in the usual sense. Incidentally, knowing the cautiousness and circumspectiveness of Mikhail Sergeyevich, one could not expect any platform statements at this time, but Gorbachev did make some accents be known. It seems to me we have exhausted the entire limit in our attempts within the framework of the current regime to emerge into new politics, but I think we need it. Regarding the coming parliamentary elections, Mikhail Sergeyevich was quite categorical during his recent statement during his visit to Petersburg. Gorbachev does not intend to run. That what regards presidential elections, here there is no indication or commitment. However, probably more likely yes than not. In any case, this possibility is not excluded. And if it is so, the usual meeting of the Central Literary House was one of the first tests of the attitude of voters to the possible presidential candidate. And now news of culture about the last sensational concert of the Festival of Arts, the Moscow Stars. This festival, you remember, was dedicated to the 50th anniversary victory. Each nation in its art, either in song, craft, or dance, asserts its idea of beauty and shows itself as it truly is, creates its own portrait of nature and beauty. Our great choreographer, Igor Alexandrovich Moiseyev, who's unequaled probably in world dance, in half a century traversing the planet with his ensemble and studying its folklore, learning the life of nations, he recreates on the stage innumerable images presenting various times various people. In choreography, he created a new genre, the theater of folk dance, and more than 300 performances which are impossible to duplicate. Folklore was never an art on its own. Folklore is a reflection of the national idea of life and nature. But folklore always inspired art, and therefore all the great composers relied on ethnic music. Therefore, he's trusted to express what the people live by. Igor Alexandrovich Moiseyev is 89. Next year we'll celebrate the 90th birthday of the master, who's crowned by all possible awards at home and 16 foreign orders. A man with a fantastic capacity for work, who defied all ideas of human limitations and capabilities. Studying the people's movements and plastics, he gave back dance in a more perfected form, giving Italians the Sicilian tarantella, the Argentinians the gaucho shepherd's dance, and the puna to the Belarusians. Generations of his dancers are changing, but the life of the troupe continues in the same astounding rhythm, which is set by Igor Moiseyev. And about tomorrow's event, our studio has received the exclusive right to film the exhibit 250 Years of Russian Porcelain, which opens tomorrow. 3,500 exhibits, probably just that figure alone, can astound the imagination about the grandiose type of the exhibit. Before us truly is the history of Russian porcelain, from the oldest exhibit, a candy dish from 1748, created by Dmitry Vinogradov, the creator of our porcelain, to works executed by young Petersburg artists today. From porcelain in Elizabethan times, this is the personal dinnerware service of Elizaveta Petrovna, to these cups which were produced on the occasion of the Chkalov crew flying over the North Pole to America. One of the sensations of the exhibit is the first showing. It's considered to be the so-called Kremlin dinnerware service created on the design of Sontsev for the large Kremlin palace which was being constructed by the architect Tonin. No less interesting, of course, are the engraved dinnerware on the orders of Catherine II in honor of the recipients of the most esteemed orders, the St. George, Andrei I, called Alexander Nevsky, and St. Vladimir. Each Tsar was concerned for the success of the imperial plant. Good domestic porcelain indicated prestige of the ruler. Over the largest so-called Russian dinnerware service, it includes almost 4,000 objects. Work was underway from 1809 to 1816. The beginning of the 19th century, especially after 1812, our domestic porcelain industry began to turbulently develop, and at the exhibit there's porcelain of the merchant and peasant shops in Zhele, the plant of the Kuznetsov Association, and other shops. And now all I have left to do is to thank you for your attention, and as always wish you success. All the best ahead, the sports news. Good evening on Channel 1, the sports news. Today at the World Championship for handball in Iceland, the 1/8 final of the Russian teams, of the 1/8 finals will be played. The Russian team will meet with the hosts, the Icelanders. At this time, one result is known: the Czech Republic, South Korea 26-25. The Czechs are in the quarterfinals. Now about the daily news of soccer. George Weah, who played this season for the Paris Saint-Germain team, signed a 2-year contract with the holder of the championship cup, Milan. The value of the transfer is $8 million and is the average between the sums offered by the French and Italian clubs. It's possible that Paris Saint-Germain will be left by the Brazilian Valdo, who said he doesn't want to play with the team until the end of the season. The notorious French politician and owner of the soccer club Olympique, Bernard Tapie, was sentenced to 2 years in prison, one of which is conditional. I'll remind you, Tapie was involved in the matter of bribing the Valencian players in the match French Championship Valencian Olympique. Eric Cantona, who was disqualified from soccer till the 13th of September, was permitted by FIFA to play in 3 benevolent matches. In the first at home in France, Cantona scored 1 goal, and the match between the amateur teams, one of which he played for, ended with a tie 2-2. The Argentinian star Diego Maradona decided to continue his career as a soccer player in the Brazilian club Santos, where Pelé had played at one time. The sum of the contract is not named. However, Diego intends to move to Brazil in the near future. His experienced managers have already found 2 villas for him, one in São Paulo and the other in the resort town Guarujá. The rugby players of the Russian team have won with a score of 18-15 in Sopot at the National Cup of Poland and won the right to play in the finals of Europe, which will start in October, and other sports events. In the NHL, the Detroit Red Wings is the first club to enter the semifinals in the playoffs in the Western Conference. The Red Wings beat Dallas in the 5th match 3-1 and ended the series with a score of 4-1 in their favor. The last goal was scored by Vyacheslav Kozlov. His partner in lock, Dina Siruseris, also stood out, Sergei Fyodorov, with 1 precise pass. The battle is tense in the pair St. Louis-Vancouver. Yesterday, last year's finalist of the Stanley Cup won in overtime 6-5 and leads 3-2 in the series. Pavel Bure scored an unbelievable goal. You'll see it in the end of our broadcast. And the final victory was cinched by the Vancouver offense, Cliff Ronning, using the pass of Roman Aksuta. In 2 other pairs, Chicago and Calgary have held 3 straight victories and lead in the series with excellent chances to continue the battle. The next matches will be held at their home sites. The club, the Winnipeg Jets, which was declared bankrupt in the beginning of May, has received a chance to stay in its native town. The Jets fans, stating that Winnipeg has a heart as big as the entire world, began an active campaign to collect the necessary sum, which according to preliminary calculations is $110 million. At the major men's tennis tournament in Italy, again, Evgeny Kafelnikov was unsuccessful, losing in the first round to the unknowns athlete Corrado Baroni. Unexpectedly, at the start, Pete Sampras lost as well. Another level of the marathon bike race, Giro d'Italia, was won by Tony Rominger from Switzerland. Maurizio Forio was second, his compatriot Francesco Frattini was third. Hence, Rominger has furthered his leading position in the overall count, and for now, there are no serious rivals in sight for first place. In the finals of the Russian Championships in volleyball for women's teams on the 17th of May, 2 of our best clubs will meet, the Urolochka and the Army team. Today, these teams held decisive victories in the semifinals. 3 rounds before the end of the major chess tournament in Spain, Viktor Kirchnev leads yesterday, tying Jan Tiemann and Valery Salov, who beat Miguel Iliescos. Both players have acquired 4.5 points. There's 1 point fewer for Ipshin, Usupov, and San Segundo. The legendary basketball player Karim Abdul-Jabbar has headed the list of the 7 stars whose names will be immortalized in the Hall of Fame. Together with Abdul-Jabbar, this honor went to our most famous trainer, Alexander Gomirski, whom we sincerely congratulate. The driver of the team McLaren, the famous Englishman Nigel Mansell, placed under doubt his future appearances on Formula One tracks. Mansell said that he can't drive his car properly because of the 2 small interiors, hence all his failures at the last races. This was the overview of the sports events on Channel 1. I bid you farewell. And in conclusion, please watch the previously promised marvelous goal of Pavel Bure. All the best.
вечер.
Good evening, as usual at this hour about the weather. The north of the European part of Russia, as previously, is under the influence of a broad lethargic cyclone with a center over Scandinavia. Therefore, tomorrow it will be variably cloudy with some possible light rain. During the day, plus 6 to 11 degrees in the northwestern area, up to plus 13. Along the territory of the Nenetsk Autonomous District, Komi and the Volgovatsk area, cyclones will pass through and atmospheric fronts that will bring rain and isolated thunderstorms with stronger winds, temperatures of plus 3 to 8. In the Volgovatsk area, plus 15 to 20. In the south of the Arkhangelsk district and the central region, from the west, an anticyclone is moving in, and because of it, tomorrow will have absolutely no precipitation. Temperatures at night, 0 plus 5, during the day, plus 11 to 16. In the Baltic states, the air will be as warm as plus 12 to 17. That same anticyclone will define the weather in Belarus, Ukraine, Moldova, and the central Chernozem region. Here, it's mostly sunny and no precipitation. At night, plus 2 to 7 during the day, 13 to 18. In Crimea, up to 23. Along the Volga and the Krasnodar, Stavropol, Remerias, and the republics of the Northern Caucasus, a massive zone of precipitation. It has been brought here by an atmospheric front, and also temperatures are expected to drop by 10 to 12 degrees. For now, on the lower Don and the lower Volga, plus 18 to 23, in the Krasnodar, Stavropol, Remerias, and in the republics of the Northern Caucasus, and on the Black Sea coast, 20 to 23. Temperature of the water near the coast of Sochi, plus 16 to 17. Rains, thunderstorms with isolated hail are expected in the Transcaucasus region in the zone of an atmospheric front. Here it's plus 24 to 29. In St. Petersburg, variably cloudy skies with some periods of light rain at night, plus 3 to 5 during the day, 11 to 13. In the capital, there's a small probability of rain. Night temperatures plus 2 to 4 during the day, plus 14 to 16. In the next 2 days, no precipitation, and gradual increase in temperatures to 22 to 24 degrees. All the best. Goodbye.